Good evening, guys. Today I want to talk about this new cartoon published in New York Post comparing President Obama to a chimpanzee. And as you can see, there was so much commotion and uproar, especially by organizations like NAACP and people like Al Sharpton out there, not surprisingly, making these protests against this newspaper. I want to explore in this video about the connections between racism and Darwinism. Darwin said these words in his book Descent of Man. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be exterminated. You see, all these savage races, anthropomorphous apes, you know what he meant by those words. Then he went on to say, the break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man in a more civilized state, as we may hope. So the break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider. Then what happens? Then he says these words, even then the Caucasian and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. Can you believe that, guys? He is saying that Caucasian and as low as, instead of as now between the Negro and Australian and the gorilla. So the gorilla and Caucasian, who is in between? According to Darwin, it is Negro. And Darwin was more sympathetic to Christian missions, but he believed that working with aboriginals was a waste of time because the aboriginals were doomed to extinction in the evolutionary struggle. He never recommended reaching out to these aboriginals because in his view they are going for extinction. And Darwin was surprised to hear about the success of Christian mission in Tierra del Fuego because he visited the island on his HMS Beagle during his voyage on HMS Beagle, and he assumed that the people there would die out within a few decades. But that's not what happened. Christian missionaries improved the condition of these people, and Darwin was just wondered. Then here is Darwin's cousin, Sir Francis Galton. This guy wrote to a newspaper, my proposal is to make the encouragement of Chinese settlement of Africa a part of our national policy. Why? They would multiply and their descendants supplant the inferior Negro race. This is the great evolutionist Sir Francis Galton wrote to the Times on June 5, 1873 to replace the black people in Africa with Chinese because Chinese were better than the black people. The great evolutionist came to that conclusion. And he also started the eugenics that killed literally millions of people in genetic experiments in Nazi Germany and even here in the United States in the first few decades of 20th century. And Jesse Owens, one of the great black athletes, he went to the Munich Olympics and Hitler did not even like to shake his hands. Why? Hitler believed in social Darwinism. In his biography, Hitler, Hubris, Ian Kershaw explains that crude social Darwinism gave Hitler his entire political worldview. You see, Hitler developed that social Darwinist thinking that Aryan race is superior to all other races. Now here is Otabanga. In 1906, evolutionists featured Otabanga. This is a pygmy, a married man from Belgian Congo. Evolutionists, they exhibited him at the Bronx Zoo alongside an orangutan. So what they wanted to show to people was that this pygmy was just an improvement over the orangutan. Even now, James Watson, evolutionist and co-discoverer of DNA, said, inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa, because all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testings says not really. So this great evolutionist believes in scientific Darwinism. Guys, the Bible showed us equality. The Bible gave us that God created one couple, Adam and Eve, and out of that one couple we all came. We shared the same blood. We did not evolve from animals or evolving. That's what enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You see, all men are created equal. We are created, we are not evolved. That's what enshrined in Declaration of Independence. And you might say that Jefferson had slaves, but Jefferson's words are bigger than Jefferson. That's what we said. Abraham Lincoln said in his Gettysburg Address. He said, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's what Thomas Jefferson believed. That's what Abraham Lincoln believed. That's what great Martin Luther King Jr. said in his I Have a Dream speech. He said, when we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, come together. So we are all God's children. We are not some descendants of apes. We are all God's children, born from one couple. We share, as Acts chapter 17 in our Bible says, that we share one blood. Unless we recognize that, we will completely muddle our thinking in scientific Darwinism. And God's word, guys, is the light to our life. And many people lost that. In fact, after Darwinism was introduced in our public schools, we have highest rise in drugs, in sexual transmitted diseases, in teen abortions and teen pregnancy. Millions of lives are dying, guys. But you say, God has a plan. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. He is